we talked about the state, and I'm concerned about Mount Airy as well. Mount Airy Planning and Zoning, did they approve the design? What's their level of involvement as far as approvals in any project that falls within town limits?
Well, the Planning Commission allows the project to move forward. They approve the project for construction. Their level of interest varies depending on which town you're in, but they certainly had a great deal of interest. But I don't think they were. It was just 2 meetings. It wasn't too terrible of a time getting it approved. The town of Mount Airy, of course, issues the use and occupancy. So the town itself does have, does play a part in the whole process.
Well, let me just get to the state dollars again. If we would pull back on this project to look at it, I know you say it makes people at the state a little leery about why are you going back and forth with this project. Have you ever known them to hold a pot of money for a school system for a year? Or do they take that and give it away, and then we got to go back to the table a year from now and ask them for the money all over again?
But it's never as cut and dried when you're dealing with the state as that. But yes, I mean we have held, I don't want to call holding money, but our projects at times have the design. If we received roofing money in 1 year, we perhaps would take the design and then do it the following year. They are very interested in when we're going to expend those funds. What they would do with funds in any given project would depend on the situation. I think it's going to be situational. So it's hard for me to really say what they are going to do or what they would do.
Mr. Zaleski, I understand you wanted to speak.
Just as you're tackling some of these specific ideas, I wanted to offer some broader context for this. First, now on the reconsideration of projects, there's really 2 things we're talking about here that are very different. One is existing appropriations. In a budget that has already happened, commissioners have already made a decision to appropriate money. It's on the books. This Board of Commissioners asked to look at all of those projects. Yes, a decision was made, but should we reconsider that decision? So you have a certain set of projects that fall into that. Much of what we're talking about here are projects where you're requesting an appropriation. There is nothing yet except an idea. On those, we really have the same situation we have in any budget year. The specifics change, but the process is the same. Here's what we're asking. Here's what's built into the recommendation. Here are some things we want you to think about. That opportunity still remains ahead of you. In fact, the next conversation will be coming up shortly where you'll be meeting with the commissioners to talk about the budget, and this will be a place to talk about future projects. When the commissioners release their proposed budget, which will make some decisions on our side about some of these things, then there's additional opportunity for you to react to that. But I think you need to think about those 2 things very differently: existing appropriations versus things you're asking for. Now, in terms of the recommendation and the idea of justification, there's nothing on this list that I would be arguing there's not justification for these projects. I think justification really misses the target here. There are good reasons for everything that we're talking about here, but I had to put together a recommendation with 2 big ideas. One is how much money is available for doing something, however good the reason is for doing it, and also direction from this Board of Commissioners saying we need to get smaller, we need to spend less. That's not just about the school system, that was about everything that we're talking about. So what you see is, at least in part, a product of those 2 ideas. So those places where you see zeros should not be read as Ted said this was a bad idea. What Ted said was, I don't see how we can pay for this. Now, for the school system, going back some years now, the funding for school projects has been state funding, impact fees for schools, and the income tax that has been earmarked for school construction, a little more than 9% of the income tax we bring in, and a relatively small bit of cash for some things that can't be covered in those other ways. With the income tax, historically, we used part of that as pay-go. You would pay cash to buy a brick for a school, and part of it was to cover the debt service on bonds that are issued. We issued a bond to buy a brick for the school. Because we've tackled some large projects in recent years, that money is now almost fully committed to debt service. We're covering costs that we've already taken on. There's very little available right now to use in a discretionary way to say, let's spend it on this other thing. That will change over time, but it's going to take years for us to work through that. There is not a whole lot of room in that funding mix to do more. Now, the commissioners can always decide to change that funding mix to make more money available. That would not be easy for them to make that decision, because I don't know where they would go to get that money. Or you do less than you can find justification for. So when we're talking about these various projects, you really need to be thinking in terms of whatever arguments you want to make. You still are left to say, well, how is it they're going to pay for that? And on the idea of leaving money on the table from the state, I have talked about this idea with the commissioners and said, there are things that we can choose not to do. The full-day K projects were previously in our plan. The intent was to keep working through them all until all of them were done. The recommendation changed that, going back to those two big ideas again, and said, are there things we can choose not to do here? In the full-day kindergarten projects, I think you can make an argument. We can choose not to do them. Not that there's not good reasons to do them, but we don't necessarily have to do them. That's why that's changed and could lead, and I would say almost certainly will lead, to leaving state money on the table, because they have been participating in all those projects. We have every expectation that they probably would. From the commissioner's point of view, though, you have to look at this from another perspective that says, okay, well, we're going to give up state money, but if we don't have the money to get the state money, what do you do about that? So, I encourage you, as always, to advocate for whatever you think you need to advocate, but don't be operating under a thinking that somehow this has become an arbitrary process to just take things out of the mix. We're facing very serious difficulties in trying to figure out where we go from here.
And I think if I can crystallize the board's concern here, as you can see expressed, is that we understand the financial situation. We certainly are aware of it. We see it within our own budget and the constraints, and doing less and less and less, having the funding to do less and less and less. But we have a capital plan that is necessary, critically necessary, to support the infrastructure that is there. Not to do something critical like a roofing project will lead to increased damage at the school, indoor air quality issues, further costs down the road. And I think that's what the board is struggling with. How can we say no to projects that are needed and needed to support an infrastructure that's been established for a long time? Now, I think there's easy projects on there that we can say, okay, we can push this out for a year, get by another year, and then try to get something in there. But it becomes that issue, and there is a belief that this is a lean capital plan. I know it's $23 million or whatever, but it is lean given the conditions of some of our buildings.
Yep. And you just reminded me of two more things I wanted to say.
I'm happy to jog your memory.
On the systemics, just to make sure that you're all aware of how this has been working again for many years, we've made a stream of revenue available, a known number that we build into the budget every year for the systemic projects, which eventually become attached to specific projects. What you see here is making use of that same stream of revenue, but saying we don't think we can get everything done we need to within the amount of money that's available. The only resolution to that is for more money to become available, which, like I said, I'm still left with, okay, where does that come from? And do you remember what the second thing was? I forgot.
Let me just talk for a while and it'll come to you.
Well, with respect to what you are talking about, I think from working with us over the last several years that this list is pretty lean compared to what it was at one time, and that there were several big projects that we removed from this list: a new career and tech center, a Southwest Elementary School, and
Modernization.
2 modernizations, because we are very aware of the lean times, and we do have a lot of respect for the job that you and the commissioners have ahead of you, that you've been that you've all been doing, and we do understand the need to prioritize and then reprioritize.
I would ask the board if there's any conclusions that you would like to draw at this point, any directions that you would have for us as staff to bring you back. Remember, any changes would require us to formally approve an altered revised CIP and an educational facilities master plan at the next board meeting.
Would we not have to bring this to the public, though?
I think by having this discussion now, it's
Yeah.
out there. Whether there's not a separate requirement, I don't believe, for a separate hearing. Ray, do you know?
Well, this
Is there a regulation that requires that?
I don't believe so. I think as long as we're doing it in public, our normal process would be to have public meetings, at least one after the introduction of the facilities master plan and then the capital plan. So I think
We could
it's
certainly
up
schedule
to
one in
us.
the next month, but my concern is the time frame of the commissioners. I don't know that would preclude that happening, and so I would say it's the 2-week board meeting in 2 weeks would be the appropriate time to bring this back. Because if we wait till the end of April, they've already had the press conference and already released their recommended budget.
Mr. Bauer?
As it stands right now, we are nearing the end of the process on this particular budget. And I would recommend that we not change anything here and wait until we start the next round of working on our capital budget to look at these additional items down here and then work through with the commissioners what we can work with and what we can eliminate. That way, we're in the process at the next capital budget and it becomes part of that budget, not trying to change this budget near the end. We're at the end of this budget.
Getting ready to start over.
Mr. Bauer, I'm in agreement with you. I'm extremely uncomfortable because of the short time frame. I'm not comfortable with having the perception that we've sort of pulled the rug out from under people when these projects are well underway. I'm very uncomfortable with that. However, I am very open to considering future projects given the conversation that we've had here today and the points that Mr. Zaleski has made.
Board members, this is not an action item, this is a discussion item, and the only thing you would need to do is give direction to me to prepare any additional documents. You do not have to reapprove a plan that's already been approved. You simply have to give direction by consensus whether you want any recommendation to come forward for a revision.
So I guess I would ask any other board members then. Mr. Bauer and I have weighed in.
Oh, I did also.
Mrs. Foley?
I already weighed in.
To not.
Right. Do the same thing. Continue.
Mrs. Shree?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, in summary then, as we approach, and Ray, on the next educational facilities master plan, we're approaching that time frame right now. I would ask
Right.
staff, as you present a recommendation to me, to keep in mind this board's directions, and as you bring the next plan forward, especially those that occur in fiscal year 13, we'll provide all the information and make recommendations.
That's correct. Okay.
Thank you. And again, just reiterating, the need for really looking at very critically, understanding what Ted Zaleski was saying, that, certainly we can make justification for any project, but really giving serious consideration, giving the tight budgets.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Howard, I would just reiterate that as soon as you get to the Mount Airy project, if you give me sort of a heads up of where you're going to go, that way I can hold bid documents or anything that would require that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. We have a